welcome back to part two, as they say in Hollywood, of my conversation with Ben Van Leeuwen of Van Leeuwen Ice Cream fame. Welcome back, Ben.
Thanks.
So we were just saying the big question is, the extrovert. We got him right here. He's like nodding and just chill. But he's a very extroverted guy, Ben Van Leeuwen. So with the rest of this podcast, the rest he's nodding. The rest of this episode, we'll find out how much of an extrovert Ben really is. I guess, the thing that we wanted to touch on at the end of the last episode, where we ran out of time, but one of the things we want to talk about was like, Ben's sort of take on leadership, his philosophy, his ideology. But I guess before we dive into that, and I think warming us up, because we just were riffing on identifying talent, like what makes a great kind of staff, because Ben was just telling me that one of what was her name, just to remind me, because you literally just said this.
Laura O'Neill is my co-founder in Van Leeuwen.
Yes, I wasn't sure which person you were referring to, so that's fine.
Yeah.
So Laura, but she was just in Inc.'s top list for entrepreneurs,
female entrepreneurs. Yes,
for female entrepreneurs, and that got me like literally thinking just there. Like identifying this kind of talent and how you find these people and how you find the people to kind of come in and do particular roles within the organization itself, be it like marketing or ops or supply chain or whichever. And typically what I find, Ben, is that like people have a certain ideology of the kind of people they want to hire into their company. There's a certain thing, people say like a je ne sais quoi, or like intangible about somebody beyond their sort of like qualifications, so to speak. When it comes to like, for you looking at hiring sort of great people to come into the Van Leeuwen family, so to speak, like what is it? Like what do you think are the intangibles?
I was just like dying of thirst. 1 sec. So I think it'll be helpful to sort of go into a specific example of hiring.
Go for it.
I mean, the first big hire we ever made was for what we were at that time calling a director of operations. By the time we found the right person, what we needed had grown into COO. And Corey Siegel, who's now in that role, is our COO president. But some good advice I've received is hire slowly, take your time, talk to a lot of people, because whenever we've hired quickly for a very, very important high-level role, it usually has not worked out. You want to get it done. You want to get that person in the role. You want to fill the role. So I think we have a sort of natural inclination just to find someone who we think is a pretty good fit and go for it. But I think you have to beat that natural inclination down and say, no, if I think I need to meet with 3 people, meet with 10 people, if it's a really important role. So just really do the work. And in terms of the sort of intangibles, I mean, I would call it intangible. You want to get along with the person, right? You want to like them.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be working together. But for us, the tangible is when we look to bring someone on in a sort of director level role or above at Van Leeuwen, we want experience of growing an organization beyond the size where we're at. But we also want experience where they've been at an organization that's our size. Because what we've found is folks from really, really big organizations who only have experience there don't have the experience scaling that we need. So, I mean, this is very tactical. We would say, okay, we're a 60 unit corporate owned business. We want to get to 150 units in the next 2 years. We want somebody who has done that. Somebody who's been at a 500 unit business and grown them to 1,000. It's super impressive and takes a totally different skill set going from 60 to 150. So that's what we really look for. And then the other piece that I always say is when we're interviewing, when we're hiring for these higher level roles, we sit down and we say, okay, these are the 50 things that we really need somebody to come in and get done.
Yeah.
And we share those and they take notes. And then we say, but what we think the biggest value driver of this hire will be is the 50 things that we don't even know that we need done. In short, we want to bring people on who are smarter than us, at least smarter than us about the department that they're going to be running.
Yeah.
So that's really, really important. And that's something we've learned. You know, we used to think, okay, we want someone to do exactly this. We want them to build these 10 financial dashboards and, you know, find cheap debt in this way. But as we bring on really smart people, we find the greatest value that they bring are the things that we weren't even thinking about. So in short, find people who are smarter than you, find people who think differently than you. That's really, really important as well, especially on the leadership team.
Yeah.
I would be really worried if the leadership team was 100% aligned on every decision. We're not. And I think that's what makes it a really good business.
Yeah.
There's healthy disagreement and, you know, productive arguing about stuff.
Yeah.
That in the end, you know, we think leads to better decision making, which is that's all business is, right? Just a series of decisions.
Just that's all it is, everybody. It's just a series of decisions,
Yeah.
left and right turns. That's the only way you can go. Tell me, like, you know, if you're saying that, like, you know, hire slowly, presumably then is fire quickly.
Yeah, I mean that's like the saying goes: hire slowly, fire quickly. We don't fire a lot.
Yeah.
I think because we hire really slowly. Um, in the past, before we had built a really robust corporate team, and we made some hiring mistakes, we did not fire quickly sometimes, and it, you know, was just
Yeah.
it wasn't good. So I think once, in fairness to you and in fairness to the person who you don't think is a good fit, you want to, you know, it's best to move on as quickly as possible. And I think for us too, what makes that always, you want, for me, like I always, you take the empathetic approach. You know, it's not you're getting fired from this organization. It's we're not right for each other. You know, there's going to be a place where you're going to be much happier because you're going to be a better fit there. We're going to find someone who we're happier with because they're going to be a better fit. So I
Yeah.
think like going at it from an empathetic approach is important. Um, but in terms of folks who, I think sometimes if it's a competency thing, you know, not really an attitude or work ethic thing, and there's more learning that needs to be done. I mean, we always would just, you know, work very, very hard to try to develop that person, you know, so it's not firing someone.
Well, that's exactly it then. I mean, like you talk about like, you know, like how would you when it comes to like something like training, for example, like, you know, if you find the people to come in and you spend so much time kind of vetting them and really making sure they're like the Van Leeuwen way or whatever phrase you might have internally for them, you know, they kind of tick that kind of box. Is there like an onus on sort of a continuous type of development at Van Leeuwen as well, like for all staff as well, like that you provide the opportunities for people to kind of grow and improve themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way we do that is constantly evolving. Right now, we do what we call IDP, individual development plans. So you and your manager are like highly focused on and meeting with regular cadence about what you think you need to work on, what your manager thinks you need to work on, what maybe you're interested in learning more about, stretch projects. So adding that discipline of putting that in place is really important because as the organization gets bigger and we're growing really rapidly, it's very easy, particularly for junior people, to I won't say to not be developed, but to not be developed in sort of a disciplined, strategic way. You
Yeah.
know, a lot of development's going to occur just from doing the work. But
Yeah.
we think it's also beneficial to really build a disciplined way of, you know, an educational plan on how do we keep you engaged? How do we keep you motivated? How do we keep you stimulated? It's
Yeah.
constantly stimulated in terms of learning new things.
But I mean, it's actually pretty cool. Given like, I mean, how many corporate employees do you have? Like, say outside of like, say, I was going to say front of house, but like store employees. Like, how many like sort of corporate employees are there of Van Leeuwen today?
So corporate's about 65.
Yeah,
And that what that doesn't include is our retail ops team.
that's what I mean. Oh,
So,
sorry.
so general managers to
Yeah,
area managers to regional directors. There's another 50 there. And then this will scale up as the weather gets warmer, but this year we'll have about, I think, 1,800 folks just working in the shops,
yeah.
scooping ice cream.
Do you feel a bit of like angst in the chest, so to speak, about hitting those kind of those numbers to like satisfy the demand?
No, I mean we it's been it's been a slow and steady growth, right? You
Yeah,
know, so it's exciting. It
yeah.
feels very exciting.
But it must be like, I mean, interesting as well, like in the sense that, I hear this from literally everybody I have in the podcast, how literally impossible it is to hire for frontline staff, for like, I would imagine from ice cream scoopers to cashiers to like servers, hosts, front of house, back of house, that it's like a very difficult job to find, or it's a very difficult task for organizations to find like hourly workers that are good. I could stress like you could find anybody, I guess, but
Yeah.
like that are like good enough that you would trust them in the store itself. Like, you've been doing the stores for a while now. So like, I mean, we're at the back end of COVID, or we're at the back end of COVID. I guess we're at the gate, or whatever the phrase is. Like, we don't really think about it as a sort of thing anymore. But like that has obviously upended, all manner of like hourly worker sort of the pool of talent for that. Is that something that like you've kind of noticed? It sounds like you're kind of like, nah, not really noticed.
Um we anticipated, I won't say we anticipated it being a challenge. We've always put a lot of importance on the people aspect of the business, particularly in the retail environment in the scoop shops. So we talk about like the retail model is being this triangle of experience. There's product, there's the physical environment, and there's service. And the service is far and away going to have the most powerful impact and make the biggest impression on the guest. So we made a decision many, many years ago to hyper focus on that, which is, it's easy to make that decision. Building an organization that hires good people, it doesn't happen overnight and it's hard, and then supports those people in a way that keeps them engaged. Um, it just takes work, right? There's not a brilliant strategy. It's supporting your people. And the other thing that we do is we accept tips in all of our stores, which means the team members are earning a lot more. So I think that makes it an attractive job. The other
Yeah.
aspect is training to work in an ice cream shop. The work is fairly simple. The most important part is the customer service, but learning to scoop ice cream is something that you can train anyone on relatively quickly. So we don't need experienced cooks. That
Yeah.
is really, really hard. But then in terms of, the culture aspect, because we're all corporate owned,
Yeah.
we it gives us more control over the culture there, and we try to create like a culture of just like having fun. We're like, it's
Yeah.
ice cream. This is your life. You're choosing to spend some of your life in this shop. So we want you to literally just be whatever we can do to make you feel happier here, to make you have more fun here. A, it just feels good. B, it's going to be great for the business. Because if you're a customer and you walk into a store and the team members are singing and dancing and having fun, which isn't always happening, but that's great. It makes you so happy. And like we're doing very we're doing important work, but it's also work that you can be relaxed about. We're serving ice cream. Like it's purely the pure purpose of that is to bring people joy. So what we say is like if our job is to bring our customers joy, the easiest way to do that is to try to create the most joyful environment for the folks scooping ice cream in those
Yeah.
stores. What is challenging though is um, management. So management where, you know, the people have a little more, you know, have more experience, they're getting paid more. It's it's tough work, you know, it's not 24-hour work, but it's not a 9 to 5. You're working at night a little more, you're working on the weekends anymore. So that remains challenging. And it's
To
highly
hire to hire
yeah,
good GMs. Yeah.
to find yeah to find GMs. It's also highly competitive there just because the quick service retail concepts are booming, you know, from Sweetgreen to Kava to, you know, the 500 other rapidly growing brands in the US that I'm not going to mention right now. But yeah, there's less talent, less trained talent. So what we're working on right now, because the only way we're going to be able to grow at the pace we want to grow is promoting from within, which
There we
again,
go.
easier said than done. You don't just say, okay, let's promote from within. So this is where actually what I was talking about before, the IDP individual development plans really, really come in handy. So a store
Yeah.
GM is going to look at their team, they're going to talk to their team, and we're going to try to find the folks who want to be developed, you know, who want to become general managers. The area managers are going to talk to their general managers about this. Because if you want to do it and you care, you can do it. You know, we can give them the tools and develop them into really good GMs. So our goal in a KPI that we're starting to look at is percentage of GMs hired from outside the organization versus promoted
Yep.
from within. So we need that percentage to go up every year. And what I'm going through now is not like a brilliant strategy. It's what, you know, any successful scaled restaurant business does.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to my podcast, you would know that this is probably the number one topic that comes up all the time, which is the dearth of GMs that exist across the board. And everyone is scrapping for the same few.
Mhm.
And so enormous demand for GMs, which now has kind of created this sort of actually what I would believe is very positive
Mhm.
outcome for most staff, which is a huge onus on businesses to invest in training and leadership for
Mhm.
their staff. To like, we need to train from within because it's like the battle for GMs. It's so difficult. Whether you're an ice cream store, like one of the number of fast casual restaurants you just mentioned there, you're all looking for the same kind of person to
Mhm.
come in who's good, you can trust to scale like that store with you. Like when you think about GMs for yours, you know, like what are the particular and I'll give you context for this question. I obviously sit down and I've done like 120 episodes of this stage now or something, and everybody tells me a different thing about what they look for in a GM. And I'm very much like, all right, like I feel like I've got a feeling down for like what would go into a great GM, and I'm curious what you think goes into like a great GM, like the absolute must-haves for a GM. What are the absolute must-haves?
I mean, attitude is most important because a good attitude is going to, I mean, this is in any business, but I mean, retail especially, you know, this is a customer facing business and we're successful if we give customers great service. And that's going to trickle down from the GM. So great attitude, kindness, friendliness, and, you know, attentiveness to their team's needs, right? So they have to, the team needs to feel supported. So I think that's the most important aspect. The administrative aspects of scheduling, of building cleaning checklists, you know, those are things that are quite easy to learn. But I think the attitude, the vibe piece is what you can't teach, you know, and we just hire for
Yeah.
that. We work hard to hire kind people who smile and are happy because that's going to create a happy environment.
You know what I genuinely find interesting about that answer is there was not one mention of P&L. There was not one mention of like data,
Mm,
interpreting data. And I feel like there's been an enormous, like to the point I was going. So it's very interesting you say that because the vibe check I'm getting, at least from all the people I'm having on the pod, who are as successful, relatively successful as you know, running like kind of large kind of organizations and like people organizations like yours, is that at least maybe like from a restaurant perspective or from a bar perspective, that the data analytics has become a huge thing for like GMs to kind of get a
mm,
grip on and understanding the P&L, like being like, if you don't know it, we will train you, but we're going to train you and we expect you to know it. That seems to be
mhm,
like, but obviously starting with like people in hospitality first. But I find it interesting that you didn't mention those two.
mm.
Why didn't they come? Did they not come to mind because you don't think about them, or is it like you're like, oh, actually, we do?
No, I mean we scrutinize them. We're the ice cream shop model is simpler, right?
Yeah,
We're there's almost no food waste, right? Other than from over portioning, but the product doesn't spoil. So that's easier to control. So then we're really looking at labor cost.
yeah,
And we sort of support them on that from, the higher ups in retail ops. So they're meeting constantly talking about that. So it's not an issue for us, which is why we don't not put importance on it. But to us, it's something
yeah,
that's easily trainable. And we've had a really good handle on for the last like half decade of controlling labor.
yeah,
So we don't see it as an opportunity. We see the opportunity as how do we constantly make service better and better and better, and that's going to make people want to come back more. And that's done just with the person's attitude.
yeah.
So yeah, but I
But I
I
got,
do think if we were running a more complex restaurant, where we are ordering 600 different SKUs a week and managing scrap and new recipes, yes, we would.
yeah.
The sort of technical financial skills would be much more important. But I
And
think
you
that's one
meant,
of the cool things about an ice cream shop is like
yeah,
that
the
part
lack of
is fair.
complexity.
Yeah, I mean that part is fairly simple, so you can really just focus on culture and vibe.
Well, exactly that. You know, you talk about culture and vibe. Like you talk about hiring kind people. Like if I said to 10 people, a line 10 people up against one, say, what's a kind person? I'll get 10 different answers for kind, probably.
Uh-huh.
Do you know? So it's like, it's hard to describe, but you know when you see it. You know? So how do you optimize hiring for that at any scale? Like you have so many stores now. How do you kind of go, this is what we think a kind person is? Does it go back to the IDP program you have? And you've,
Yeah, I mean the truth is like I, I'm not close to hiring GMs
yeah,
anymore, but it starts at the top. So we work hard to hire nice people.
yeah,
You can be tough, right? You can push people and be candid with them when they need to improve, but being mean, and nasty is something that like we've never had any tolerance
yeah,
for in this organization, whether it's on the corporate team or in the scoop shops. So when something like that happens, like, usually the person is just immediately out. It doesn't
yeah.
happen much, because we work really
Hire
hard, but
slowly.
yeah, I mean, I think you kind of get it, right? Like it's a vibe thing, right?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's funny, like you say, you kind of get it because, like, I talk about this a lot. Or when we think about hiring good people, it's like what I find more fascinating is not that like people do hire kind people and want to hire kind people. It's like, of course, but it's like that there's no defined way of saying it in a way that, like,
Yeah,
to your point, you can teach somebody service, you can teach somebody how to scoop, you can teach somebody the point of sale,
right.
but can you teach them to see an overflowing trash canister of ice
Yeah,
cream cups and do that without being asked to do it?
right.
Like that's what you're looking to hire for, like that kind of switched on good person, if that makes sense. And it's like,
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about now is like we would call it like you wouldn't call it like a kitchen sense because it's not a kitchen, but like just it's that awareness of
yeah,
space, which is really, really important. Um, and I mean that we would look for through experience, right? If we're hiring from the outside.
yeah,
Because we know if they're coming from Starbucks or Chipotle or Sweet Green, we know those things were just as important in those organizations, and they're bigger than us. So there we assume that they've worked to instill the importance of those things into everyone who was there.
Yeah.
Um, not always perfect, right? But I mean, with this said, though, I would still we want all of our stores to be perfectly clean at every moment. That's not always going to happen, but I would still take a a little bit messy store with incredibly friendly people over a pristine store with kind of like cold people. Not to say we don't want the stores to look amazing, right? But it's back to the vibe piece. Like
Yeah.
great service will, I think, like give you allowance on slightly missing on some other stuff. And again, this isn't me saying we want to miss on anything. It's just, I guess, stressing like how the service aspect, the friendliness aspect,
Yeah.
the not only friendliness but professionalism um, in the service is so important.
I mean, I guess there's not a lot to unpack, and there is a lot to unpack there in the sense that, like, ultimately, like, you know, it's a vibe. And I totally get what you mean. I actually think that's an interesting way of framing it, in the sense that, like, you take a less sterile, pristine environment with more kind people than the other way around. And, you know, if you think about just going to any kind of restaurant, I guess like that's why people have like their favorite restaurant, like,
Yeah,
rough around that's where rough around the edges kind of comes in, why people have like a phrase. Not that I'm suggesting that Van Leeuwen's ice cream is rough around the edges.
right.
More like when you think of, oh, this great place around the corner, it's a bit rough around the edges, but the food is like fucking fantastic,
Yeah.
and you're like, that like says a lot about the place itself, in the sense that somebody's willing to say that. And it's like, I get what you mean by that it's a vibe. I guess like it's amazing to me how you can kind of construct that kind of vibe, across like 50 plus stores today and wanting to do like 150. Like that for me is like, wow, like the multiples of that culture evolution, you know what I mean? That you're like, how to like sustain that. And I guess that goes back to your point about, well, that's why we want to hire people who've gotten like places from 50 to 150. We want to hire for that kind of person versus like the 500 to help us maintain that sort of question. Because
Mhm.
what I tend to like asking people who are in your position is like, how do you even think about scaling the culture and the challenges? Is it something that kind of keeps you up at night?
Yeah. Um, well, so it was actually harder for us to build the culture that we wanted when we were smaller than to scale it now. The reason for that is we just didn't have a lot of experience in management as multi-unit management as we grew the business. So we were good at running an ice cream shop, hiring some great people, working there with them. But as we got up to like 5 to 10 stores, the culture was really hard to maintain. And we would have my co-founders and I, Pete and Laura, we would have suboptimal experiences in our own stores, and they would know it was us. I mean, this was 7-8 years ago. You
Yeah.
say, gosh, how do we, this isn't what we want, of course. Like, and we think we're really nice. So why isn't everyone being super friendly and excited? So it wasn't like as simple as just be really nice and, treat people well. It was, I think it's holding people accountable. It's hiring really good people, because I think people in whatever job you're in, like, you want to be held accountable, and if you don't have someone not like dropping the hammer, but like, holding you accountable and
Holding
pushing
you.
you and saying good job when you do a good job and saying, hey, you need to improve here when you do that. I think that actually that drives better culture, even though it sounds a little tougher than just being like, it's all, anything goes, it's a happy place. So as we built our team, that's when the culture started getting better. And again, it's like the work never ends.
Yeah.
And are you going to get the exact same vibe in all 60 Van Leeuwen stores today? No, of course not. But we see as we grow, it gets more and more consistent.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that's totally fair. I mean, like culture in one sense is just like an execution of your ideal over and over and over again. So like ultimately if you're putting in the reps in one and putting the reps in more, it should be somewhat replicable the way you do it. But to your point, which is interesting, you were like in the earlier stores, it was much harder.
It's much harder. Yeah.
because you're ironing out those kinks. And I actually have had people on the pod, like other CEOs of other like even restaurant brands, say that scaling from
Hmm.
like the first to the second to the first 5 locations was like just moving heaven and earth. But getting to
Yeah.
100 by then was just a lot easier for them because the internal
Yeah.
processes were down
Right.
and they kind of had what they needed to do, the right people in place to help them to get them to those kind of places.
Right. Yeah. No, precisely. You have departments, and every department's job is to execute this shared vision, right?
Yeah.
From HR's job is to source really good people, and in the interviews, pinpoint what characteristics and behaviors make us think they're going to be the right person for the job. And then their job is to support people when they have issues. And when you're growing, we didn't even have an HR person in those days.
Yeah.
It was a decentralized, disjointed hiring process, it was hit or miss. This store might have amazing culture and amazing vibes. This store might have terrible culture and terrible vibes, because there was no standard in place. There's a vision, right?
Yeah.
But I saw on Instagram, I just saw a post of Steve Jobs the other day from like 20 years ago. And he said something that I thought was so like insightful. And he said, a lot of managers make the mistake of thinking that a great idea is what sort of makes businesses great. And he said, it's not that at all. It's purely the execution. And we
Yeah.
find that that's so true. Like, ideas are the easiest thing ever. I could be in our leadership meeting tomorrow and come up with like 10 ways that we could triple the size of our business in the next 3 years, and it's all execution. I mean, it's not hard, open another 200 stores. The stores work. It's good ice cream, right? People
Yeah.
like it, franchise in 10 countries, but it's all execution. Like, that's where it's, that's again, I guess what we were saying before, it's like succeeding in business is just like a series of decisions, which is how the execution happens.
I think that might be the headline for the episode for the part 2.
Yeah.
Succeeding
Right.
business is just, and I'll put a little asterisk next to it, a series.
Well, it's crazy, but that's it, right? I mean, it's decisions, how you make those, the style in which you make those. Yeah.
So I guess, like, like, speaking of decisions, like, when do you want to do the 150 stores if you're at 60-ish today? Like, is that like in the next 2 years kind of vibe, or like what's the growth?
Yeah. I think we hope to get to about 80 by the end of this year, 120 by the end of 2025, and then, marching towards, 150 by mid 2026.
That is some serious growth, man. That is
And
like,
that does not include franchising as well.
oh, hello.
So,
Is this
so
a public announcement,
international,
friend?
yeah. And so no, I mean, we have franchised units
Yeah.
in Singapore, but we're working on finding other regions to do more. But the thing with ice cream shops as well is like the AUVs are going to be much lower than McDonald's or Burger King or Sweetgreen or Kava, because it's ice cream. The cost is lower and you don't go every day. So one Van Leeuwen store might be worth like half a Sweetgreen. So we need to do a lot more. But they're also much easier to open up, to get staffed, to operate, to build.
So it is
not
kind of
100. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So like, I guess to like a potential franchisor, so to speak, or franchisee. Sorry, I'm correcting myself now. Somebody who's interested. I mean, like, in one sense, it's like that is a relatively sexy proposition, that it's not as half the amount of heartburn that you get from opening, a different sort of restaurant chain, and they know that, like, okay, the unit economics are like probably like slightly less than like what they get in like a type of other kind of fast casual, but at the same time, the amount of like ancillary costs, so to speak, are just night and day different, which is makes it like, is the goal to like keep a kind of corporate store owned in the United States and then franchise kind of globally? Is that like the vision?
That's the vision. Yeah. That's the vision. I mean, if we were not headquartered in the biggest consumer market on earth, we might say, let's go to another country and do corporate owned. But there's so much work to do here on corporate owned stores that, if we did Paris or London, which would be really fun, it would take, so much corporate resource in terms of salary expense growing
Yeah.
versus our current team can do Charlotte and Atlanta and Chicago. Um,
Okay. That's interesting. I think but I guess like I mean, you must be so incredibly bullish. I mean, like, I like in terms of like financing the growth of this operation as well. Like, are you like raising outside capital for this as well, or is it like just plowing back in those profits and just going to town?
yeah, just plowing back in the profits. And I mean, I say we're bullish on it, but with ice cream, it's such a conservative business model selling, super premium ice cream, and that people love it. They've always loved it. They're gonna love it in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. I mean, I always say like our same store sales aren't going to double year over year. They might go up 10 or 15%, maybe with really bad weather or something terrible, they'll go down 5 or 10%.
Yeah.
But that's the part of the business that I love. It's not, for better or worse, it's not trend based. It's not going to blow up, but it's also not going to like rapidly wind down.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I'm a buyer of ice cream and a buyer of your ice cream. So, color be not shocked by that. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I'm a habitual eater of ice cream. I think, you talked about like people don't go every day like they would to a street clean. I think you need to talk to Laura and myself about that. I think
Yeah.
we go every other day. Where's the nearest ice cream store? But yeah, no, man. I mean, honestly, like it's quite a journey. I mean, I guess like, you know, what like has been the biggest personal sort of like when you think about your kind of life with Van Leeuwen, so to speak. I mean, you've always been a Van Leeuwen, but I guess with the company you created, like what makes you think what's the thing you're most proudest about?
The thing I'm most proud of, I mean, the thing I'm most proud of is that I'm making myself less and less necessary to the business. Um, because that I think is the coolest thing. If you can create something that sort of lives on its own, where the ethos and the values in terms of product development and culture. I mean, I'm still running the business, and I bring a
Yeah.
lot of value, but that feels really cool when I say, oh wow, without me, this would happen in the way that I think it should happen, and in the Van Leeuwen way. Because that to me is building, a real business, right? Not just being a sole proprietor. Um, so yeah, that makes me quite proud.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
that comes from team, right? That comes from great people and tribal knowledge, which sort of is now running through the veins of the organization, which is too ingrained to just dissipate with the departure of one or two people, which is really good.
yeah, I mean, you're kind of creating a legacy. You know what I mean? Like, and they always talk about like you hear leadership gurus, management gurus. It's like to like work yourself out of your job. Like in the
Exactly.
sense that
Yeah.
like you can't be an expert at everything, and you just have to give away your Legos, as they
Yeah.
say. You got to be comfortable with the flexibility of not necessarily knowing how the sausage is made, so to speak. Like, how's the marketing sausage made? It's like, well, I've
Yeah.
hired great people to do that, and they will inform me. You can find out, and it's interesting. Was that a Did you feel when that inflection point kind of happened for you? Was there a moment like you were like, was there ever a time you're like, oh, I'm kind of losing my grip, or I'm kind of like an anxiety almost, or were you like it was almost like a slow fade into this kind of feeling?
Yeah. I mean, it was a slow fade. So for Peter, Laura, and I, Peter's my brother and
Yeah.
co-founder. Laura's my other co-founder, best friend. We were, for the first 10 years of Van Leeuwen, there was no corporate team. So we were doing everything. We were hiring, we were, not approving the refrigeration repair, but, sourcing the tech to fix the compressor on a small broken refrigerator. Um, and I bring up the repair because, there's a lot of repairs and maintenance in this business. And when it's the owner and entrepreneur and founder sort of calling and sourcing that and really hustling, like you're always going to pay less, right? And when it's the owner and founder, getting a new store design bid out by 3 different GCs. And, I don't want to use not nickel and diming, but just scrutinizing the bid. You're always going to pay less. But what we learned, and it was really over the last 6 years, is we could continue doing that. And we could take, a deep knowledge of how to build stores and how to fix things. And often we could do it for less. But it would take a lot longer and there's no way to scale it. So we sort of let go and we said, this is going to happen differently. It's going to happen more consistently, right? And it's going to happen in a way where not only we're more hands off, but where our store development team can be more hands off, because, maybe the contractors we're hiring are a little more expensive, but don't need as much hand holding and oversight. So yeah, it was a slow fade into, do this. We know it's going to work. We know we would do it differently. And I used to think the way we did it was much more efficient, but it wasn't efficient to scaling, right? Because if I was poring over GC bids on store designs and that's all I was doing, right? No one would look at real estate, right? Nobody would develop new features. Nobody would think about the org chart of our corporate team, director level and up, and international franchising. So I think it's giving up some, I guess, profitability as a percentage, right? I mean, if it's just you running the show, you can almost always, be super profitable if it's really small, but it's hard to do that in scale. And I remember I used to hear about what Starbucks spent on their stores. This was like 10 years ago when we were spending like $150,000 to build a store. And, I'm sort of making these numbers up, but someone said, Starbucks spends 600. I said, oh my gosh, they're such idiots. We really know what we're doing. And then of course, as you scale, you have to spend more.
Yeah. Just to pay for the expertise and pay for.
Yeah. Pay for doing a store and, getting a store built in 5 weeks and getting 30 built in a year, 40 built in a year, versus calling in favors from every friend and, best friend's a mill worker. And we save 15 grand from staining the wood ourselves and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You learn a lot doing that too. I do think it's important to I won't say, I think it's always a benefit if at some point you've done everything, because of our scrappy start, because of doing it ourselves and doing everything for 10 years, we have a really, really deep understanding of the core of every single aspect of this operation. From building an ice cream factory to engineering floor drains and air conditioning to obviously the real estate aspect, to the people aspect, to the graphic design aspect, which slows you down. But I think for us, it's built such a strong foundation of understanding, which both consciously and subconsciously leads to wiser decisions, I think, as we grow.
Yeah. And it also to me sounds like, that's an edge, the fact that the business inside out. You hire somebody from a global conglomerate that also makes ice cream. I am pretty certain that they would not have half the insight you have into what it takes to create it, which goes back to your point about just hiring smart people. But you took your time and were deliberate, intentional, and are now able to it's almost like you've developed such a trust in your own kind of the three of you, you have such a trust in your knowledge of the business that now that you're able to kind of hand off bits of it to people to execute on your behalf, that very much they are the right people because you took your time. So it's kind of that kind of moving slow is in the dividend pay period of its time now, it sounds, because I mean, to be at the number of stores you're at already is pretty phenomenal. I mean, not that many businesses kind of get to 10 locations anyway. You know what I mean? The fact that you hit 60 and goals to 150, I mean, that patience, whether it was intentional or not, that scrappiness, that hustle, it's kind of very much door open for you. It's been
and now I just got a text from Laura, and it's a rendering of a new store design, because every store we design is different.
Yeah.
Like we're constantly evolving, trying to make them better, trying new aesthetics, trying new operational improvements. And she said, "I don't like this. Call me." So we are still very, very hands on, and particularly with the design.
We
But I'm
still
looking
care.
at that she doesn't like. I
uh,
like it. We'll see though.
yeah. Do
Yeah,
you want me to critique it right now, live on air?
sure. Yeah.
I presume they didn't take your Van Leeuwen like font. Is that your font
Oh,
now?
yeah. That's that aside, that's more of a placeholder.
Yeah. Do you know what it reminds me of? Do you know what that entire corner operation looks like? Do you know what's that
Hmm.
famous painting? That 1950s American painting. It's like something at nighttime where people are like sitting at a diner. I'll send it to you because it looks exactly like it. And why
Oh,
can I
yeah,
not
yeah,
pick what it
yeah,
is? If you
yeah,
render that at nighttime with somebody in there eating some ice
yeah.
cream and like took it in like a black and white, that like kind of location would actually look pretty kind of like, I don't know, almost like Americana
Yeah.
nostalgia.
I do have to run.
Yeah, no, likewise. I mean, we're definitely over time here again, which is a good sign,
Alex,
I guess, that we're good at chatting.
yeah, we did it.
Um,
Thanks, Alex.
we finally got there.
Yeah,
Man, you're an absolute gent. Thanks for being so candid, so honest, and
happy to. Yeah, it's
man,
fun.
tons of great advice.
Yeah,
And I guess apologies for my awkward introduction because it was like we were riffing and it's like terribly awkward.
okay.
But we're here, we're done, man. I appreciate it. You're a great guest. People are gonna love this episode. People are
Awesome.
now messaging me about episodes, so I'm curious if we get any feedback about you and see what they say.
Okay.
But I will follow up with you over email and we'll just there, man. So thanks for
Okay.
coming on the show
Thanks.
and have a nice day.
Okay. Bye, Alex. Thanks.